Dear listeners, colleagues that have already tuned in, welcome to our weekly series. We call it the Tuesday evening series. This is the digital online streaming mastery show with the focus on train the trainer. So if you are very keen on learning about the do's and don'ts of conducting a digital online show, be either streaming audio or video, this is the place to be. Welcome. This is Commercial Radio Worldwide, the mind, the journey, the destiny. We apply our mind to the journey that takes us to our destiny. We are streaming on Podpin business platform. If you are struggling to hear us well, it's highly recommended that you download the Podpin app from your App Store or Google Play Store. Register with your email address and allocate it a password that you will always remember. And this is a once-off registering, and from then onwards, you will be able to hear us. You are also encouraged to follow Commercial Radio Worldwide here on Podpin, because then when we go live, you will be able to receive a notification so that you can tune in without any distraction. My name is Sam Zimmer. I'm moderating the show, but I'm joined, as always, by a number of our people who are the graduates of our digital online streaming program that we started in 2020, just during the COVID time, and it has stayed that way, and we have developed it into number of units, the do's and don'ts, and that is the series, and that's what it's all about. Our shows are based on a principle we call the idea. We inform and entertain, develop and educate, empower and support, associate and network. That's the idea. Today we are at unit number 25, conduct number 20. So we have 40 units to cover and 35 conducts to cover. And the conducts are nothing else but the do's and don'ts of digital online streaming, either audio or video. Let me introduce the colleagues, or ask the colleagues to introduce themselves and check in. I'll also check in. I've checked in the show and the platform, but I still have to check in myself as a participant in this show. Greetings, colleagues, and let's start with you, Divesh. Say hi to the listeners and check in for us. And then, of course, the rest, the colleagues will follow. Over to you.
Thank you, Sam, and good evening to you. Good evening, colleagues, and good evening to the listeners. My name is Divesh Motilal, resident DJ of Kometsa, a graduate of the Kometsa's digital online streaming mastery program, an engineer by profession, and I'm very passionate about sharing the skills and knowledge that we've acquired and still fine tune as we deliver these shows every week. And indeed, Sam, Unit 25, sure, it was a mammoth task, but it was enjoyable journey, and we're almost reaching the end. For me, I had a much found appreciation for the work of being digital and online. Today I had contact session meetings, so a lot of energy and time was wasted sitting in the traffic of Johannesburg. But I'm excited once again, to be part of the show and the journey, Sam.
Beautiful. Welcome, Divesh. Thank you so much, Edith, and also congratulations to you for having started the digital mastery, digital online streaming mastery block. And I'm sure you can share with the listeners somehow at the end or during the show. Over to you, Rapula.
Good evening, Sam. Good evening, Divesh. Good evening, Umpile. Good evening, Maynard. And I see this Margot here. And also, good evening to the listeners. I had one of those wonderful days, more like traveling, but it's meant to happen that fashion. And I'm also a graduate of Kobetsa Radio, sharing what the experience is. And I'm learning every day. Even today, I'm going to learn a lot. And especially with my colleagues and also interaction with their colleagues. So hopefully I'll have a wonderful afternoon, wonderful evening to learn from one another. Thank you, sir.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rapula. Good to have you here as always. Maynard?
Thanks, Narisem. Good evening, colleagues. Good evening, our listeners. Sure, myself, I had a very long day, one of my longest days today. But otherwise, I'm okay.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Let's hope you have stamina to be with us for the better part of this show this evening. Welcome.
Thank you. I will try my level best. Just, yeah, literally came back to the office here.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. We'll energize you. Marco, Tadera France.
Good
Over to you.
evening, colleagues. Good evening, listeners. Today I had a very wonderful. Sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you in that Ramut.
Thank you very much. I had a very wonderful day because there was a wonderful discovery. Whilst I was renewing the membership of my wife, the forms that I was completing was very, very, very interesting, because I've noted that all these engagements we're having with the Brasem and colleagues result into a program. So Cometa has got, in terms of its online program, has got massive, very interesting and empowering programs that arises from our engagements every evening, and the engagements that we had during our engagements in the last 2 years. So yeah, I'm looking forward to another wonderful session tonight, and hope that it will also be very much interesting like all the others that we had. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Ndatara Mutla. And yes, congratulations to your wife. I can see she has upgraded to entrepreneurship and self-employed member type, which is a step in the right direction because she is an entrepreneur. Thank you very much for facilitating that, and give her our regards. I hope she's listening as well.
Yes, she is.
Beautiful. Welcome, Elizabeth. We are glad that we have you as our member under the entrepreneurship and self-employment category. We're looking forward to learn a lot from you about the experiences you're making as an entrepreneur. Maybe one day we'll talk about the products that you sell. Thank you. Thank you so much. Umpile, over to you. Umpile, I'm not sure if your connection is helping there. If you can hear us, you are muted on our side. So over to you to greet the listeners and check in. Otherwise, we'll give you chance lead. Oh, okay. So the audio is giving him a problem. So I got the message. Thank you so much. We got that, and as long as you can hear us, we are happy. Yes, colleagues, we are talking unit number 25, conduct 20. We are making progress indeed, and this one is quite very interesting because it talks about what you look at when you are searching for a guest to join you on a show, and we link it up with the interpersonal skills. A lot of points that are coming from the interpersonal skills program are quite very much appropriate for what we are going to be doing. But perhaps let me kick off by asking some of you that have hosted shows before and have searched for guests, what were you looking at, and was that what you were looking at fulfilled as a criteria post the show? Anyone who has hosted the show? I know, Rabula, you have hosted the show. Maybe let's start with you. How have you gone about identifying the guest? Because you did bring quite interesting guests in the past. Maybe share with us that experience as a way of jumping onto the topic.
I think, Sam, what is critical in identifying the guest is what topic are you looking at? I recall at the time we're looking at leadership and risk management, if I'm not mistaken, at the time. And we start looking in terms of the pot. Who are the key elements of people in this sphere, which we can ask them to come and share with us their experience, their learnings, their pros and cons, what in their views they could have done it better, how they advise the next person to do it in a different sphere. It's more like, what did I know? What I could have done better if I known now? Because at the time it was unknown territory. But as you grow up, you start seeing things differently in terms of now you understand the territory. That's how we used to sort of gather the list of names. Ideally, the topic is more important, or the area which you are focused on is most important in terms of from there on, where do you start sourcing out the guests? And in addition, you don't just source the guests, you prepare the guests first. This is what we're going to talk about. It's your show. I'm just an anchor or a coordinator of the show. The guest keeps on talking, telling the audience and listeners about the specific topic which you can have engaged. Or I think there's more in terms of what we used to do at the time. Thank you.
And I guess you were also looking at the background of the guest and the experience that was shown on their profile CV or on social media platform, and that was enough. But now you know that is not necessarily the everything you have to look at.
Yeah.
And we'll touch on those. Great. Divesh, you also hosted a number of management and leadership experts at some of your shows.
Yes, thank you, Sam. One of the points that I've raised in several of our previous shows is that planning for your show is paramount, and it cuts across all the various modules which we've spoken about. And choosing the guest is one of those aspects which also involves lots of planning. From the beginning, for my management and leadership shows, which I used to host, and me being in that sector from a professional perspective, I already had a pool of prospective uh, guests that I could have brought onto the show. We use platforms such as LinkedIn as well to engage, to get a hold of guests. What was important as well for me is that from the perspective of the leadership show, we were wanting to have guests who could share their knowledge in terms of the sectors that they worked in, but also to add value to our listeners in that they could identify opportunities, share lessons that they have learned in overcome challenges that were in those specific sectors being, for example, the energy sector, and having industry leaders from the energy sector would be a focus point, for example. And like Rapula said, we would select the guests based on what value they could bring to our listeners. You could get lots of leaders in a specific industry, in a specific sector. However, I wanted those specific ones which fit in with the show, the theme of the show. It adds value and it's in line with the ethics and the values of the platform itself. So there were criteria which I drew up, and from that criteria, then we would select prospective guests, and then, of course, make contact and see if the guests were available, and then take it from that point, Sam. Thank
Mm. And I guess those criteria, they are still relevant even today, except that now we have brought in quite more critical aspects of the criteria that will speak to the performance of the guest on a platform like this, right?
Indeed, Sam. And of course, the value proposition these days as well has to be mutual. The guest has to have a vested interest in wanting to be a part of the show, wanting to share those positive attributes that you would like for your listeners to attain from listening in on those shows. And of course, as we rolling out our modules, we're also learning, as we've always said, learning is a consistent practice that we should get involved in. And likewise, when we talk of guests, um, as we go through the rigmarole of having a new guest on each one of our shows, we do learn something new about what the guest might be requiring from the shows, what the guests could add in terms of value for our listeners. And of course, as hosts or co hosts, we'll also learn in terms of how we could deal with certain circumstances that we might find ourselves in when dealing with new guests, Sam.
Indeed, indeed. Beautiful. I think you are the two of you have quite a reference point to make. I'm not sure if Maynard and Margot has any input to make, because I don't remember them intensively hosting shows. I think, Maynard, you did participate in one of the shows. Yes, of course, Ramuta, you also did participate, but you were almost like scheduled and you were talking with internal book reviewers. So there was not much leeway and opportunity to organize the shows, because I think you, Rapula, and Diverge have had the opportunity of actually putting together a show, which is quite different to just coming into a show and hosting. So 50% of the success of your show depended on the other steps before you even come to a point of preparing the guests and then welcoming them in the studio. Am I right?
Yes, you are right, Sam. Preparation thereof. Don't forget, if you prepare it, even if it's a once a month show, you don't prepare it 2 days before the show. It took some time because you don't know the diary and the schedule of prospective guests. How does it look like? What will be the pros and cons? What type of technology is there? Don't forget, technology was still new at the time. Will the show be able to sustain itself in terms of technology? You do some dry runs earlier to find out if the linkage is properly done, and then can hear one another. Sometimes even during the show, it get cast off. You need to continue in terms of the conversation. But if you ask me now, start preparing for a new show, then I'll know things differently than I did before.
Mm. Mm.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
just,
that does not mean today I won't learn. I'm still going to learn.
yeah. So that has added other criteria now because of the platform that we are using, and that is availability of the guest, readiness of the guest to be taken through the dry runs, and then of course the connectivity tests that you have to do before the show. Because sometimes people say, "Oh no, I'll log in. Just give me a link," and then when they then click the link and the show is about to start, then you realize that there's no compatibility between the equipment they use and the equipment that we use. Had you done that earlier on, you will have actually realized that you need some mitigating steps to make sure that connectivity doesn't become a disruption. In other words, affinity with technology itself is a requirement for a guest to be considered. So let's go into some of the objectives that for tonight's conversation quickly, and then we can then take item by item. We're building up on top of those criteria that you've just elaborated on. So we're looking at now you're looking at somebody that is going to come into a show, and as we always say, that our shows are not necessarily interviews, they are conversations, which means that some of the criteria that applies to you as an anchor of a show, they actually apply to your guests, because your guests equally could actually be holding the space as they converse with you, even though they are designated as the subject matter experts. So the first criteria is the understanding of the difference between hearing and listening. I would like you to note that, and we need to come back to that, because it does happen even to myself sometimes in the show that I've heard somebody speaking, but I wasn't listening and I've missed the point. And how critical that is in a conversation, especially when you are also holding the listeners in the background as the people that need to be informed, entertained, and also be educated and developed. So hearing and listening, this differentiation there is very important. And then we'll talk about that. Then the next point is the ability or knowing some ways to improve the verbal skills of asking questions and communicating with power. So sometimes a person can be very knowledgeable about the topic you bring in, but they may not necessarily be able to engage on it or even to teach on it. And then, of course, also to communicate it with conviction. That's what communicating with power is all about. So yes, when you are looking for guests and you are talking to them, and you really know your guests that their listeners, your listeners are very dynamic. Even if they know the subject, they will want to be inspired. So they might be listening because they just want to hear how the guest is articulating the issues, not necessarily how good or how knowledgeable the guest is, because they themselves maybe know even better. But the ability to ask questions and communicate with power makes them even love the topic even more. We'll talk about that. The third objective is understanding what nonverbal communication is and how it can enhance interpersonal relationships. This is even more complex because right now we're speaking, but we are not really in each other's face, and I'm not able to see your nonverbal language, but I can sense it from your tonation. But also by looking on the dashboard here, I can see that all of you are muted except myself and Umpile. Maybe the unmuting of Umpile might be saying, Sam, when you are done, I'm ready to talk. That is a non-verbal language because it is built through the platform. But those of you who are muted, the moment I see you unmuting, I already know that you want to talk, and then I'll call your name. And when you hear a name, I'm basically saying it's for you to follow through. Yeah. So that's really a challenge when it comes to technology platforms. But once you get used to these technology platforms and the icons and all those type of things, you start actually seeing them as the extension of the person on the other side. For instance, one of the powerful icon is the mute and unmute button. Because if you're not ready to talk, it's advisable that you mute it. And then so that when I see you unmuting, then I'm able to see that you are about to talk. So that is a building of verbal language using and imposing it onto the platform. The next one is we want you to be able to identify the skills that are needed to start a conversation. You know, as I always say, that a good start is a good finish. So sometimes if your guest is not able to come up with the opening remarks because he's not having that ability, you can actually lose listeners immediately from the moment the show starts. So in other words, the introductory conversations, which are sort of like, we call it a hook. If you write the book, they say the first pages must hook your reader so that they don't drop the book. In a show, it's also like that. The way you start the show must hook them in so that they don't drop off and go away. So if you are good at that as an anchor, but your guest is not good at coming up with powerful opening remarks, he or she might be a contributor to you dropping the listeners. But sometimes it's not because of the capability, but it's just lack of awareness that the first segments of your conversation must be aimed at making it interesting and attractive and motivating to the listeners to stay on. So you might talk about something that is happening related to the topic, but not about the topic. And that might just what? There must be some insights that are going to come and the people come. So that's very important. Then from the conversation start, you need to be able to move it along. The way you progressively go into the conversation must be a build-up. You can't immediately from the moment you hear the climax, you shock the people and say, where is this coming from now? So the build-up is very important, and that is why the anchor's job and the moderator's job is to make sure that we systematically build up to make it more magnetic. and then, of course, progress to the higher levels of the conversation, and then, of course, tone it down. And you take it to the highest level of conversation, deep with these points we've raised, but then you also have to be able to tone it down so that we can also almost tell that you are moving towards closure. In other words, meet the climax and don't tone it down. And that's part of ending and checking out. So you might be checking out by reflection. In other words, everybody has been listening, but now you're sharing with us how actually there's this conversation affected you and what are you taking home with and what are new lesson learnings. That's the reflection, and therefore that's checking out, and that is the toning down of it. We want also to be able to check if your listener is able to identify ways of creating, managing situations when you've forgotten somebody's name. That's quite very interesting because often it does happen in the show that you even forget the name of your guest. What do you say? Oh, we can't say, by the way, what's your name? You could bring in to say, look, wow, you won't believe this. I actually, your name just slipped my mind. What does this say about you and your name that I can't actually relate? So something like that. Be creative about it, because forgetting somebody's name could actually set people off. But remembering names becomes important when you have follow-up shows or when you have people posting messages into the chat box and you want to link the input with the person who raised it. Understand how seeing the other side of the talk, building bridges and giving in without giving up, how it can improve your skills in influencing other people. Understanding how facts and emotions can help bring people to your side. So we don't want you to manipulate people, but we want you to really win people and make them fully present with you. And they are saying that if you actually can sometimes link facts with emotions, that's an art of actually hosting a show or engaging in a show as a guest. Learn tips in preparing for bargaining and closing a negotiation. If there was any negotiation, you could find yourself having negotiate your way out into an opinion. That is still applying the same skills that you will use in any other negotiation situation. Learn tips for making an impact through powerful first impressions. So that introduction, that opening, or that start of your conversation is also part of first impression, especially when people are hearing you for the first time. If you are mindful and conscious of that, you're going to make an effort to achieve that impact, because you don't want to lose the opportunity and you want to be called back next time so that you continue educating and sharing your view. Of course, assess the situation as well. If your situation needs your help, you must be able to jump in and assist wherever you can without really taking over. And being zealous without being offensive. Yeah. So those are some of the things we want to achieve in the discussion today, but we are going to base it. What do you look at? So in other words, we are saying that over and above your guest being a subject matter expert on the theme you are addressing, they must be experts in the interpersonal skills, which really speaks to how you engage with other people through your mastery of the communication skills, verbal and non-verbal. Let me hold it there and allow you to reflect on those objectives. Divesh?
Yes, thank you, Sam. Indeed, those were a lot of objectives you've shared, more than a mouthful, I would say. Very comprehensive. But for me, what I would like to add to what you were saying is that those are the aspects that you would need to deal with, if we can put it this way, as a recipe for your planning in terms of how you can engage with the guest. And of course, all of these elements are things that you should consider when you're still selecting your guest. Will you be able to still follow this recipe with a specific guest that you had in mind? Perhaps it's not, there may be an industry expert, a subject matter expert, but you may find that in terms of you being able to execute your recipe or your plan, that specific potential guest may not fit into this plan. You may not be able to deal with that specific guest in terms of delivering the aspects that you had mentioned just now. So for me, yes, as much as um, um, you may find a subject matter expert, they may not be the right person for your show. If you
Mm,
take into consideration these aspects that you've raised, and you may need to move on and select somebody else who actually can bring that expertise which they have into a live platform like digital online streaming. So it's very important to consider this do's and don'ts aspects when you're also then selecting your guests. Thank you, Sam.
mm. Indeed. And I guess this is just broad guideline because it might be difficult to find people who are both subject matter experts and at the same time the masters of communication skills. And then you might have to meet a compromise. But the question is, how far do you go in making that compromise, especially if you might have options in the market? Any comment there, Margot, Maynard?
Yes, Prasem, as you have indicated in the beginning that may not have not hosted live shows. However, the objectives that you have outlined are also applicable in our practical situations, especially in social work when we are dealing with our clients.
Mm,
The listening skill is very,
mm,
very important because once you listen and you hear, you are expected to reflect, and your reflection must be informed to extent to which you were listening, to show that you were hearing what you were listening. So yeah, with social work, these objectives are also applicable. Thanks.
mm. Or any other aspect of life. You know, I'm looking at the input from Umpile on the WhatsApp here. He says that this is a very interesting topic when it comes to improvement of one's interpersonal skills. And he says he looked at the brief and he felt, oh, this is something to watch, to listen, or to tune in. So yeah, indeed. And I think we always have said that a number of these competencies that we are learning and acquiring are really applicable to a number of areas. And I think when you reach a level where you are a natural, you will just adjust. You will just remember the skills that you need to be able to enter into conversation. It might be a conversation not necessarily on a digital online streaming platform, but it might be a conversation with colleagues at work, or it might be conversations in a networking function. So that's exactly the point, that we don't want to bottle you into just digital streaming. We want you to understand these are the competencies that you will need all the time. But we happen to be using this program to practice and learn them until they become our way of being. So yeah, so thank you very much, Margot. The one I think Maynard, you have had a conversation as a co-host, not necessarily as the main host. Is there anything that you can share from those past experiences when we were still learning this skill?
Oh yes, not that's in the day and the same. Indeed. We co-hosted several shows before, and definitely we still need to apply the same principle as a co-host, because you still need to listen to what the guest is saying and still respond to that particular conversation, and go with the flow of the conversation and following all the aspects. And yes, definitely, to me, I can say listening is a skill. So it's something that is very practical and something that need to be practiced in every aspect of life, whether we are on a live streaming show or we are just in a conversation. Listening is a skill. We just need to engage.
Mm, mm, absolutely, absolutely. Gurapula? Okay, you have made your input, I guess. Sorry about that. I'm taking you back to the beginning of our discussions. Yeah, let's look at what we call the some of the aspects that we want to look at. There is a saying here that some ways that you can communicate with power verbally. Here, 4 of them or 5 of them. Stick to the point. Don't be too casual. Emphasize key ideas. Tailor fit your communication to your audience and connect. So that speaks to us as guests. I mean, as hosts. And what about the guests? And how do you bring that to their attention when you are conversing with them? So we have packaged these things under verbal and non-verbal. I've shared with you some of the pointers there, that the verbal communication is equally important as non-verbal communication. And I've shared with you the dilemma of non-verbal communication when you are on a platform like this. But does that mean that you can ignore that just because you are on a platform that doesn't really give you the opportunity to see the other person? No. Because why? The streaming do's and don'ts do apply to both audio and video. So if you are on a platform like this where you don't see your other person, you still have to hold that at the back of your mind to say that there could be some hints that come through the tonation of the voice, that come through the struggling to be expressive, or also, as I said, instruments or the icons on the platform itself. So the key thing here is not whether you have those facilities or not. The key thing here is your level of consciousness must always be there. That sometimes is not what you don't hear could be quite very meaningful to you. By just assessing what could be going on in the mind. Is somebody, for instance, default into a second of silence? That is a very powerful non-verbal communication that could be picked up as a point of discussion. I noticed that you went silent for a bit. What was that about? Or is there anything that came in between that you want to share? Divesh?
Yes, thank you, Sam. Just to the point that you were raising now, indeed, the level of energy that's in your voice, it can actually upset the entire flow of the show, for example. You would have had trained a sort of a first run with your guest to get them affair with the technology, for example, or even the topic, and just for them to get a level of comfort in terms of how things will go when the show is live. But when you come onto the live show and maybe something that happened during the day messes up your mood or your level of energy, that can transpire into the show and actually upset the plans that you had for the show. So indeed, the communicable way in terms of how you convey yourself to the show, to the listeners, and how you actually control the show as well. And of course, even though you may be the host, your guest has to get as much of the information that he has in his level of expertise over to the listeners, and you have that responsibility to get the best out of the guest by also highlighting those areas of focus that you have mentioned.
Yeah. Indeed. And the few pointers they are giving us here is for instance, they're saying that where the nonverbal comes in, they say, don't focus on what you say. It's not the only important thing, but it's also how you are saying it. That is very, very important. So the tonation and the energy, the way you go about formulating things could be revealing a lot. So that, what about if that you notice that not in you but in your guest? How do you then interject when you get some nonverbal cues that maybe are a distraction to the way you wanted the show to flow? How will you make your guest aware? Do you have to be straight, or can you plug that into your conversation in such a way that it does not actually expose their vulnerability? How will you do that from an anchor point of view, Rabula?
There are various ways we can look at it. One of them is to repeat what a guest has said, but divert it back into the topic.
Yeah.
You know, when you said the last sentence, you said, Sam, we just said A, B, C, D, but have you thought of X, Y, Z? So by so doing, you pull back the guest, to where the topic where he was or she was into what you're talking about for the day. That's one aspect you can do it. Do you know one other aspect which came to my mind in terms of but let me not explore the non-verbal portion of it. I'll hold it back and I'll speak about non-verbal later on.
Okay.
Is when you engage with the client, because some customers, some guests, they flow. Do you know when the brains flow?
Yes.
They flow. And then if you let it go for a longer period, you might end up having guests being bored or say, no, now this is, when a priest
Monologue.
preach in a church,
It's
yes,
a
it becomes monologue. Yes, so you need to keep on putting some hums in between so as to make sure to go ups and downs and make sure that you create an attention from your audience and you create that said, okay, I never thought of it. Oh, okay, I never thought of this. So your
monologue.
attentive listening will help to make sure that, we're moving out of the topic. If you don't do that, then you're going to lose your audience, because key element here is for the guest to speak about the topic and you actually encourage to explore more, but within the topic.
Do we agree that most of us as professionals, we are challenged by this in the sense that we will do the same as guests if the anchor allow us, because sometimes professionals, subject matter experts, enjoy listening to themselves. Naturally, as human beings, we love listening to ourselves, and to a point where sometimes as anchors we forget that it's not for us to talk, but the guest. Ours is to facilitate and hold the space. What's the view there? Your view there,
You're,
Divesh?
oh,
Sorry, Rabula, carry on, Rabula.
I said you're correct, Sam. Sometimes when you're anchoring and the guest is speaking and you realize that the guest can speak, instead of pushing the guest to speak, you end up taking over, and we need to guard against that.
Mm. Because the listeners didn't tune in to listen to you; they tuned in to listen to your guests.
Yes.
Divesh?
Yes, Sam. And to Rapula's previous point, no matter which route we take in order to get the conversation back or to elevate the guests in terms of the point that they were raising or failed to completely raise, it must be done in a respectful manner, and it must be done in a manner that doesn't shock our listeners as well. But
Mm.
also in terms of the aspect of having a good understanding of what role you're playing. Yes, it's a difficult aspect, especially if you also have some level of expertise that your guest has, so that sometimes you forget and you want to jump in and almost take over. It's very important that you remain in your lane. So if you're the guest, be the guest, and if you are the host of the show, you must make sure that your guest is the one who articulates all his levels of expertise and points, and help him to be the best that he can be, and make sure that you don't do too much of the talking. Thank
Mm. Have you ever hosted or anchored a show, and then at the end of the show you reflect, or you listen to the podcast, and then you say to yourself that, "Sure, I was just talking too much here," and how does it make you feel?
I'm a culprit of that. It makes me feel bad, but I don't. Let me leave the others to comment on that.
Okay.
that should become part and parcel of your do's in terms of the skills that we have been sharing from the Kometsa Digital Online Streaming Mastery Program, you're constantly learning. So it's important to go back to listen to your piece of work, listen to what the guest was doing, what they did right, what they did wrong, what you did wrong, what you did right in terms of you, the role that you played, whether you were the guest, the host, the co-host, or the like, and also use that opportunity to constantly improve on the quality of show that you produce. So yes, we will make mistakes. We do make mistakes, but always learn from them and try to improve on the future products that you develop.
Mm. Now, there are two types of guests. One is the guest that flows and you battle to come in between. And then the second guest is the one that you struggle to bring them, to make them talk. What is your strategy as a host of a show or anchor of a show for such cases? And if you pick it up during the briefing of the guest or preparation of the show, if you pick it up, then what tools to use? And what if you don't pick it up and you only pick it up when you are live in a show? What are the tools as an anchor of a show, a moderator of the show, you think you can bring in, keeping in mind the points you've just raised, Divesh, that it needs to be done in a respectful way because you didn't invite guests to embarrass them. Let's hear other guys as well. Marco, you have been in situations where you struggle to get people come up, especially during the book review. And sometimes your people, they just, and then you don't even have time to come in between. What do you normally tend to do there?
Yes, at some stage, I was very much lucky to get the guests who just flew, like Sylvia. And I noted that the understanding of the subject matter and the context helps the guest to flow. And at some stage, I found that there are some that were struggling to talk, and therefore I had to develop strategies of reflecting in some of the sections of the book, just to keep our engagement flowing. Yeah.
So you prepared for in case the guest doesn't come out, and then you prepare for in case the guest just flies. So that's part of the planning. Am I right?
Yes, that is.
So this is the whole idea of. I mean, I know, as you have mentioned a number of times, that the key success factor of any hosting of a show is the preparation by you, the host, the anchor, and the guest. But sometimes we don't talk about what must we pay attention to in that planning phase. When we meet with our guests and we discuss in the show, what are the things that we must alert them to? Because they are not with us in this train the trainer show as we have now. We experience them when they are right in the show, but we have a moment of opportunity when we are doing the planning.
Yes,
I
I would
think with us,
mind.
Prasem, we were lucky.
Carry on, Ndadramul. We'll give Divesh.
I was saying in our shows, we were very lucky because we had the guests that are part of us in Cometa, and therefore they were able to understand the content and the context and the content of the book that we were reviewing, and the culture of Cometa. So I found it very easy anchoring the shows and involving them.
Using the Lokotla, for instance, a methodology of interchanging and giving each other space.
Yes.
Divesh? Yeah.
Yes, Prasam. As much as you rightfully said, we can be planning, but often or sometimes the plans don't go according to our desires, and you would get a situation unlike the one that France had raised, where the guest is knowledgeable of the organization, the subject matter relating to the book review in that specific example, and the show can actually flow very well. But sometimes, I mean, you don't actually get that opportunity where the show is going exactly according to plan. But it's your do's and don'ts that we've been outlining in our units and our conducts that will
Mm,
help you to learn what situation you get on the day when the show is going live, what to do and how to deal with that situation to move towards an aspect where the guest is giving you his best. If he is nervous or is not at ease at that point in time, but when you were doing the prep show with him, everything was much better. Maybe something happened during the day to unsettle him. It's your job as the host, the anchor, who must bring that situation back in line with regards to your guest, giving as best a show as you can, and then of course giving the listeners the best quality of show that you can. So it's the do's and don'ts that we've been learning. The little element of getting to know the guest before the show, which can
mm,
also then help you and guide you to then bring the best out of that guest.
mm. Yeah, we should be able to rescue the situation, and you can only rescue the situation if you are attentive, you are fully present, you are intentional, and you have a model and a framework of hosting and anchoring the show that you follow. I've just summarized the entire 40 units, Divesh.
So why did we take so long, sir?
Because it's not easy. We are just human beings. Rapula?
I just hope now the listeners don't believe that they can just buy Unit 25, Conduct 20, and they've covered the whole series now, Sam.
Yeah, no. It's not how it works. You
No,
have to
indeed.
practice and you have to repeat it
It
10,000 times to get to
it
the mastery level.
Yes, indeed. It's the gift that we are also sharing to the listeners and those who will embark on the journey of doing a digital online streaming mastery program training with Cometsa, where even though we've highlighted that these units, these conducts, even when you just look at the topic, it may seem very simple, but when we start to unpack it, the listeners should appreciate the dynamics that comes about the theory and how it relates back into practice is not as easy as it seems. And indeed, once you learn the theory, the do's and the don'ts, and obtain a level of practice, obtain a level of mentorship from those of us who have gone through this journey and continually improve on the application of these skills. That
Mm,
level of appreciation is something that once you latch onto it, it really will elevate the kind of service that you can do in your digital online streaming programs that you put together, Sam.
mm. And of course, you have not just been flowing like you are flowing now, all of you, including myself. I'm sure you still remember the very first days, how difficult it was. Rabula?
Sam, it was very difficult, especially and not only difficult. You know, sometimes when you start anything new, you've got a lot of anxiety, which
Mm,
often blocks the weights or it blocks the flow of what is running in the back of mind. Even if your pre-preparation may also go off the window, and not because it goes off the window, you don't know, but it goes off the window because of the anxiety. Say, I don't know what to expect, because doing preparation behind the scenes is fine, but going on a live podcast like it happened now, it's not the same as doing preparation. It's different.
Mm. Mm. So we are
People,
emphasizing the importance of practice to gain that
yeah,
experience and
yeah,
confidence.
yeah, and practice and practice, and it's not an overnight thing. When a person is excelling there, hence I'll go back to that book where said talent is not enough. So it's not an easy thing.
Mm. Mm.
You need to practice and sort of become an expert in that practice.
Yeah, beautiful. There are points here that I also want to share with the listeners about the 4 levels of conversation. And those 4 levels, and I think this is also a model we use. We might not have called it that, but if you take the 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 do's and don'ts that we have covered to date, you actually realize that these 4 levels are there. The first one is the small talk, and then the
Mm,
second one is fact disclosure.
mm,
The third one is viewpoints and opinions, and the fourth one is personal feelings. So they're saying that the real art of conversation is not only to say the right things at the right place, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. It requires sensitivity to the stage of a relationship, the context of the conversation, and the comfort level of the person you are talking to. Now, you will remember that the number of shows we have different unique characters or context. If you take our monthly VUT show, it has got a different context to uh, Bridging Cultures show or Digital Mastery show.
mm.
But all of them have got this aspect of small talk, fact disclosure, viewpoints, and opinions. I will say that small talk, we do it at the very beginning of the show, especially using it to settle down. We will talk about the weather. We'll talk about our days. So the small talk stages, they are there to establish a rapport. So if you invite a guest, and let's say we get the partner of Valley University of Technology onto a show, you tell them we're going to talk about the work integrated learning that they do with VUT. That's the serious stuff. But it's important in the beginning stages of the show to allow them to go on a small talk. How is the industry? What is happening in general in the real life before you jump into this serious talk that they are going to be talking about. So that is a function of a small talk. And as an anchor, you must actually use the opportunity like that. And as I said, it's part of the checking in. And then, of course, the fact disclosure says, in this stage, you tell the other person some facts about you, such as your job, your area of residence, and your interest. So that is really the introduction that you all do. I mean, it's beautiful. Some people think we are wasting time doing that, repeating it all the time. But it's because on the platform, you have new listeners every time. But it's also saying to the listeners that this is some of the reasons why I'm part of this journey and why I'm here. So the fact disclosure stage goes well, and then you can proceed. If it goes well, then you can proceed to sharing the viewpoints and opinions. That is normally tend to be the agenda. So in this stage of the conversation, you can offer what do you think about the various topics that we are going to be addressing. In this case, when we started, I shared with you the objectives of our conversation, and I've asked you what has been your experience around this. So you are sharing the viewpoints and the opinions, you know. So that's really almost the meat of what you are about here. And then when we normally check out, it speaks to the last level, which is the personal feelings. And we'll say, share with us how has this conversation affected you? And we need to do that for the listeners. I think the recent show, Divesh, if you remember very well, you had, when you closed with Dademukiva, you wanted him to reflect on the conversation and what he has learned from it. I think that is very helpful, because you may have a guest sitting there judging themselves, thinking that they haven't really lived up to their expectations. But when you ask them to reflect on that, and then you also share with them what you have learned from them, you are not sending them away with a self doubt and a self judgment. You want them to leave feeling good that they've met your expectations. And that's where their personal feelings, your personal feelings become important. And that is really the checkout, the role, the value of the checking out. And I think you have done it several times, and you have seen how guests become very relieved when you allow them that opportunity. Divesh?
Yes, Brasam. I just wanted to refer our listeners to the module where we really delved into the area of affirmations. I think that's one of our, from my own personal perspective, that's one of our most powerful modules, because not only is it very relevant to our digital online streaming mastery program, but it also has a profound impact on the lives of our listeners on various levels, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, whether it's in a relationship perspective. I just wanted to
Mm,
refer our listeners to that past show that we did, Sam.
mm, mm. In many cases, that is really the byproduct of our conversations, because of the nature of the platform we are. There's always something to learn from our guests, and there's always value in affirming our guests, because they invest their time and their knowledge with us, that tend to benefit our listeners. And yes, indeed, that module on affirmations, people go to our podcast, insightsonlinepodcast.com, and look for the module on affirmations. I think this point is being very much emphasized there, especially as an anchor and a moderator. This is one aspect of the shows with guests that we must always emphasize, because we want people to walk back from the shows and feeling better and great that they've done it. And how you do that, you give them positive feedback. And of course, if there are areas of improvement, normally we do that as part of our aftercare. And I think we're still going to have a module on aftercare. How do you follow up with guests once they've been in a show, and give them feedback confidentially if there's an area of development that they need to attend to for their own improvement and growth? Margot, you did that very well when you were doing book review. Maynard, you can come in as well once Margot give you a reflection. Yes, Margot. I, th- I think you are talking, Marco, but your network is failing you. We haven't had anything you said, so you may want to log in and log out and back again, because we are not here. Yeah, no, we are not able to hear you, Marco. If you don't mind,
Yes.
log back.
But
Yeah, your network is cutting. Okay. Uh, yeah. All right. You just hold it there, Margot. When you get better link, you can reflect on that. Right now,
so
we are not hearing you.
now, am I audible now?
We can hear you
Yeah,
now.
got
I
it
hope
here.
yeah, no, we can carry on.
Yeah.
You are better now. I hope yeah,
Oh,
carry on.
I was saying, making small talk and moving beyond reminds me that before we go into conversations, we do a planning where I'll consult the guests and I'll give them briefing notes, and then we go through the briefing notes. And then before we start the show, I'll be introducing myself several times, plus I'm repeating myself because, as you said, there were new guests in each and every session that we'll be having. So then I'll give the guests the opportunity to just introduce themselves again, addressing us with their personal issues and addressing us about their past experiences and linking them with the topics that we'll be discussing. Yeah, it used to be very interesting when we were doing the book reading.
Yeah. While you are still at that point, I don't know about you, but I tend to pick up that one of the reasons why we invite people to be our guests is because of who they are, what they have achieved in their lives, personal and professional. But maybe we are not emphasizing that fact enough, that guests' introduction by themselves is actually key deliverable of our shows, because we want to say to the listeners that here is somebody that has done great in their personal and professional life. We have invited them, and if you are hearing them for the first time, listen to them telling us their life story. But I tend to think that maybe we are not emphasizing that importance to our guests, because I find our guests shying away from talking about themselves and just delving into a topic, and we lose that strategic objective of why we invited them. Can we reflect a little bit on this and tell me, how can we improve on this? Is that something that we need to be aware of when we do the planning with the guests, that they need to sit on that, because that creates the context and that gives background and that sharpens the interest of the listeners?
Yes, Brasem, part of that importance is that one of our main goals is for us to network. And when we introduce ourselves, we kept emphasizing to me that it is part of promoting my business, so that the guests and the listeners know about the business and make a follow up. So, yeah, I think as time continued, we used to encourage our guests to take advantage of the opportunity to introduce themselves personally, but to also come into sharing with us their professional skills as well as the business that they've been doing. Yes.
Indeed, including at the end when they check out. And I'm just reflecting here, and maybe I think you will appreciate that. I want to add this to us because we are in charge, including when they check out, that they take some time to tell the listeners where the listeners can go and read more about them and more about their companies. Because we make these assumptions that everybody will know where to find them. I mean, I would like us to reflect there, because it just dawned to me that this is two aspects that we should be emphasizing to the guests, because we don't pay. They don't get paid to come and share the valuable knowledge with us. The best we can give them is to give them the opportunity to tell the listeners where to find them.
You used to drive that Prasem at the end and say to the guest, where will the listeners find you?
Mm.
When it was a silence issue, but you used to guide us that the guest must indicate where the listeners will find them, so that then they are able to benefit from the services that they are offering. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's that. I think. Yeah. Any reflections there, Rabula?
You know, I was speaking while this thing was on mute. Do you know, one of the,
Yeah.
it reminds me, I need to go back, a little bit back. One of the interviews or a session I had with Komoto, hopefully I
Yes.
might not be infringing his personal name.
Mm,
Subsequent to that, I think the following day I gave her a call. And she
mm,
said to me, Rabula, do you know, I took that for granted. You actually educated me.
mm,
And I asked her, what dedicated you? Said, you know, when I do a reflection in terms of what I was saying yesterday and subsequently, initially I took it for just minor thing. But as an goal, it drains my energy because I need to focus and stay there and make sure that I flow. And the way you guided and reflect in terms of clarification, my questions, my statements, helps me to focus. And that's in terms of that. I said, no, we are learning. And that's what people need to know about
mm,
either industry itself or about yourself as a Komodo. So that
mm.
reflection also helps to let a person grow in that
Absolutely.
instance. I said, I'm glad I make you to reflect. If I should have had another opportunity in the future, I will call you back. And said, yes, I wouldn't mind to come back. But
Mm,
that's a reflection in terms of saying every time you concluded any show or any podcast, listen to it so as to grow.
absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Yeah, let's move on to another point, which is we spoke about small talk and moving beyond. Now we want to talk about moving the conversation along. Remember, moving beyond, you transition from small talk into the agenda and using those 4 levels of conversation. But now, when you are in a show, this is one of the biggest challenges, and that is how do you move the conversation along? To avoid situation where you are stuck. It can happen that you the anchor and the guest get stuck, and then that silence is not a silence of technical intention, or the saying that silence is also language of communication, but you are literally stuck because you don't have the art of moving the conversation along. And here there are just 4 pointers, and I think you'll find them in a number of other modules. And that is asking for examples. If somebody says something and you don't know how to follow through, but it's something that you might be finding difficulty to convince yourself or somebody else, one of the easiest ways, give me an example of a situation where you find yourself confronted by this point you have just shared, just for the benefit of the listeners. You'll be amazed how that actually expand or give the guest opportunity to even expand and simplify that. So that's a learn to use, ask this question. Give me an example of that. Of course, be careful that you are not actually coming across as being querying or contesting for that. But you are just giving me an example as a way of emphasizing or magnifying this point or making it easy for listeners to follow. That's that. And then the next one is the ability to use repetition as a way of moving the topic along. And this is how you can actually do it. It's you repeat exactly what the guests have said, and then you say, "Did I get you right?" There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually very powerful to do that. And then you can follow it up with a summary questions, which goes like this: do I hear you saying 1, 2, 3? Or let me just summarize what you have just said now in few ways just to check if I heard you, especially if the guest has been rambling for a very long time and you are mindful of the fact that he might have lost the guest, the listeners. Now, as an expert anchor, what you will do, you will say, let me summarize what you have just said to check if I heard you very well, or for the benefit of the listeners. That's another technique.
Or
The other
alternatively,
technique,
al-
yes,
alternatively could say, let me rephrase what you just said.
indeed, you rephrase, or you can even paraphrase, because you don't have to remember everything a person has said, but you'll say, okay, let me paraphrase, rephrase and paraphrase. They all achieve the same thing. Paraphrasing is to say that don't hold me to it because I'm not going to be able to repeat every word that you have said, but I can actually repeat the message by paraphrasing. And then the last point is that of asking for clarity and completeness. Do you mind repeating yourself and clarify a little bit more, because I think I'm missing something? So those are the 4 techniques you can use to actually to move a conversation along. The first one is asking for examples. The second one is using the repetition. And the third one is using the summary questions. And the fourth one is asking for clarity and completeness. This really will take you to a level of mastery, Divesh. And let me hear you if you ever remember yourself actually using that. Any of those examples?
Well, I can't recall a specific example, but I do agree with you in terms of bringing yourself to a level of mastery. With practice, we've had instances where we didn't have silence, but we had disruptions, or we kind of moved off track. And that's one way of bringing in, especially sometimes you've got a co-host and the show kind of goes in the wrong direction that you had planned. You could use those techniques to bring the show back online and to reaffirm the guest in particular, because sometimes these things as well can upset the flow of the guest, and he can even lose his own frame of.
Indeed. Especially, I'm glad you're raising that, Divesh, especially being cognizant of the fact that as you do this, apply these techniques, it must not be you going into over, what's the right word? Over, there's a right word for it. I know it starts with over explaining. In other ways, overdoing it to a point where people start to even forgetting who actually is the guest. In other ways, you need to do them in the form of interjecting, not necessarily over explaining. You know, that practice of telling a long story and then ask a question at the end. You have just occupied the space. You haven't achieved anything. The real thing that you wanted to address was to ask that question that you asked it in the last sentence. And then the listeners just drop off and say, I mean, you might as well have just become a guest then. And that could be very bad. And we do that a number of times because, especially if the top subject is what we are passionate about, where you start enjoying ourselves talking. Now that we are in the trainer course now, I mean, we are indulging all of us. We are all anchors of shows. It's okay. But in a real show, you have to guard against that because you might upset your own guest as well. So that's, let's move on. I'm mindful of time. The next point is that of influencing skills as a guest or as an anchor. There are 3 points they are raising there is seeing the other side. Again, that is also very, very important. Building a bridge and giving in without giving up. So as you are hosting the show and you are anchoring, over time, you need to get to a point where you and your guests are so aligned in terms of interaction that you could give in without actually giving up an opinion. So I think we are saying that the key aspect of you being a guest in a show, you need to be able to influence your listeners, not so much of your host, the guest, because they're your host your host and anchor. They are there for the guest. Basically, getting to a point where you are really influencing in a positive way your listeners using those abilities. Where when you have 2 opinions, 2 views, you could actually try to understand the other side being your partner on the conversation. And then, of course, trying to build the bridge, in other ways, finding each other, over a particular issue. And I think a number of times, because we are vested in this bridging digital mastery show, a number of times we make an effort to find each other because we are a natural team. But it might not be easy in a show where you are meeting a guest for the first time to find each other, especially if you both have very strong opinions around something. And we are encouraging you as an anchor to always strive to do that, because you are anchoring for the benefit of the listeners, and therefore sometimes find the other side, build the bridge, and give in without giving up. It doesn't mean that when you give in, you totally give away your opinion. But for the benefit of the listeners, this is not the time for you to be having a contestation with your guest, because then you are not saving the listeners, but you are saving yourself. That is influencing skills. And then, of course, bringing people to your side. It's almost like, it's not really manipulating them, but let people see your point of view. You do that by sharing a lot of facts, especially if there's contestation. CNN likes doing what they call fact checking. When the political debate is happening or people are debating something, they have people in their studios, in their background, that instantaneously are fact checking what you are bringing along. And I find that quite very interesting. Of course, you need really good experts to do that, to fact check spontaneously and immediately rectify that, because you don't want the guests, the listeners, or viewers to walk away with a wrong point which is not fact checked. But that's, as I said, it's a high level of mastery, that one. But you can also bring it all together. In other words, don't just look at one fact, look or at one point or one perspective. Bring all the perspectives, and then, having looked at all perspectives, sum it up to say, in view of all the perspectives we have considered, I think I will go with this point. Yeah. If you are debating between management and the unions around the talent management, you can look the facts from management and the facts from the union and the facts from everybody else, and say, having looked at all these, I think it's better that the middle of the road is taken. So in other words, you consider all the facts. A dash of emotions. Sometimes you could bring emotions that actually move people to a particular point. For instance, when we talk about the environmental care, we talk about this big issue, ESGs, environmental. What do they call? What's the right full name for the ESG? The United Nations ESGs. What do they call them? Environmental.
Social and governance.
Sustainability. Yes, environmental
Sustainability and governance.
Yeah, those sustainability things. They are very emotional stuff. If you bring the emotions into it, you might just make people to see your point of view, to say, we can't continue just extracting from the environment and hoping the earth to sustain itself. So you bring some things like those to make people see the bigger picture that you are trying to highlight. That also is an art. You have to practice it and you have to learn to do it. And also something, Divesh, we spoke about, that if you are in the space where you are hosting subject matter experts kind of conversations, you might find yourself being challenged to really be well read, read a lot, because otherwise you'll find yourself being exposed, and reading a lot and listening, watching more such debates, special kind of shows, just make you to become up to date. I'm not saying know everything, but at least must have a way of contributing a well-read kind of inputs. And then lastly, before we check out, is at the end of the day, it's about making impact. Are we making impact with our shows? Are we changing views of people? Are we educating? In other words, let's follow our idea principle. Informing and entertaining, developing and educating, empowering and supporting, and of course, creating the desire to associate and network. So that's ultimately what is important in your show. And you need to make sure that when you check out, you verify if we have made a difference. Creating a first time powerful first impression, we spoke about that. Assessing the situation and then being zealous without being offensive. So yeah, so because sometimes we think shows are just for the sake of shows. Shows are there to bring change and to contribute to the development of humanity. And of course, entertaining is part of it. Great. Thank you so much, colleagues. As you can see, that looking for guests, if we look at all these parameters, especially when it comes to interpersonal skills, major emphasis on influencing, communicating, you can actually have a little bit of a framework you use to decide. Obviously, sometimes subject matter expertise become a determining factor. But if you have a choice and you have 2-3 subject matter experts, these aspects of our conversation today could be very helpful to decide on who you go for. Great. Let me allow you time to check out. We have 4 minutes to go. If I can allow you, colleagues, to check out, reflect on our conversations, and check out, that will be great.
Sam, my take home today is that I've learned, revised or review what a person has done some years ago in terms of how do you package it to make sure that you're still back in terms of key element of listening skill. That's my take home today.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabula. Divesh?
Thank you, Brasam. My take home today and re-emphasis is plan not just for one show, but for your whole series, that the guests that you select fits in with your theme, it fits in with your platform, the station that you are part of, and of course will add the value in terms of the areas that was highlighted. Within the show, you'll be able to engage and be able to get the best out of the guest for the benefit of the listener.
Beautiful. Thanks, Divesh. Margot?
Yes, Brother Sam, today it's just a confirmation that the online streaming mastery shows are following the same check-in and check-out dynamics. As Divesh has said, what is important is that before a show, you must do the planning that will inform the introduction of the show, that will inform the content of the show, and that will inform the conclusion of the show. And all these are using the same check-in and check-out principles or dynamics. Thanks.
And 8. Thank you so much, Ndadramut. Yes, Umpile, I know you're battling to come across. You can give us your checking out through WhatsApp here. I could read it to the colleagues. Maynard, we lost you. You can also check out via WhatsApp. Yeah, thank you, colleague, very much. We're moving ahead. Unit 25, Conduct 20 is done. Now that we have analyzed what to look for when we are looking for guests, unit number 26, Conduct 21, coming in next week, Tuesday, is about going out now to source the guests. Here, we want you to acquire the skills in proposal writing to source the perfect guests for your show. That sounds very serious, but it's just literally giving somebody a call, writing an email why you want them to come into the show. But that is basically requires you ability to convince, to propose, and sell the value proposition to the person. you want to bring in. You might say, oh, I met you or I had you there. We have this show. We're addressing this topic. My research has showed me that you are the person, and hence I'm writing this proposal to you to become my next guest at my show. So we look at proposal writing. Once again, as we have said, it is proposal writing that you can use in many other areas, but we're going to confine it to proposing for somebody to accept to become a guest, because we underestimate the work we do, and because we don't write down all these steps, it's not as easy as we think. So that will be unit number 26, contact 21, next week, Tuesday. Thank you so much, colleagues. That was Commercial Radio Worldwide. The mind, the journey, the destiny. We apply our mind to the journey that takes us to our destiny. This is brought to you via the platform, Podbean Business Platform. Please download the app, register, and follow our radio station so that you receive a notification when we publish or announce the next show. If you want to be part of this dynamic team from a membership perspective, go to commerzamember.com. And there you can apply and register online. There are about 16 different types of membership categories. And of course, opportunities for you to become the author of one of our blogs. As we always remind you, the shows are based on the principle called the idea. We inform and entertain. We develop and educate. We empower and support. We associate and network. That's the idea. And I hope we live up to that principle this evening. Thank you, Rapula, Divesh, Umpile, Franz Ramuda, and Maynard Maisina.
Cheers.
And of course, the guests on the line, I can see you. Most of you have been tuning in. Thank you so much. You take care. And please check insightsonlinepodcast.com. This unit will also be there as a podcast for you to refresh. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Cheers, bye.